Good afternoon, everybody. You're all very welcome to our Biopharma webinar this afternoon. I'm Michelle Murphy. I'm a director of Collins McNicholas, and as I said, we're delighted to be joined by you today, taking time out to hear this particular webinar. We hope everybody's keeping well, and perhaps you're planning a few days off over the coming weeks. And again, as the summer moves on, I'm sure people will be planning their holidays. We decided to reach out to NIBRT, it's the National Institute of Bioprocessing Research and Training, with an idea around a webinar for biopharma. And in particular, we wanted to share some of the amazing news that's happening in this sector, because it is a huge growing sector here in Ireland, and this major developments on the horizon. So this is a great way of sharing updates with you all regarding the future trends and I suppose really what's happening at the present here in Ireland. Biopharmaceutical manufacturing accounts for over 60,000 jobs, both directly and indirectly across Ireland, so a huge employer. And the exports in Ireland are worth about 39 billion annually. So again, a huge contribution to the Irish economy. One thing we've noted over the last, I suppose, 12 months is that there's a larger interest in the enrolment in higher education across science, technology, engineering and maths. About 28% of the higher education enrolments are in that space, as we call it, STEM. So great to see that happening, and we do hope that will continue over the coming years. Given the strong supply of talent, quality of our graduates, and the long history of pharmaceutical manufacturing, we really feel Ireland is in an excellent position to capitalise on global expansion within this biopharma sector. We in Collins McNicholas have certainly seen a demand for engineering skills across process, validation and chemical engineers, also experienced team leads. And we have also noted a strong growth in contracting opportunities in this space across biopharma, pharma and life sciences. So again, it's an open, I suppose, opportunity for people on the contracting space, and obviously important that you consider upskilling and looking at diversifying perhaps into other project areas. So I know we'll talk about that later on. We're delighted to collaborate with the team in NIBRT for this webinar. NIBRT themselves have trained over 4,700 people during 2019, and that's across 19,000 learning hours. So that's some achievement when it comes to training, and that's all in their purpose-built site, which replicates a modern bioprocessing plant with state-of-the-art equipment. And we can vouch for that, because Collins McNicholas have, over the last number of years, have sent cohort of our recruitment consultants to take up on those training hours on site in NIBRT. And for us in this collaboration with NIBRT, it's great for our people to really truly understand the workings of a biopharma facility, and we found the training to be excellent. So we thoroughly enjoyed our time training with NIBRT. I know NIBRT have launched their online academy this year, offering 23 more courses in this sector, which is delivered virtually. So again, providing a wonderful service for their students who wish to develop an upskill and perhaps even hone in on specific skills, which will prepare them for the demands of a busy and modern biopharma plant. Today, we're delighted to be joined by John Milne, and John is Training Director in NIBRT. John joined NIBRT back in 2013 in the role of Training Director. His responsibilities include working with the training team who are responsible for delivering the various education programs across both industry and education clients. Before he joined NIBRT, John worked as a consultant working with several clients in biologics area and developing purification process and ancillary quality documentation. John graduated from UCD with a PhD in biochemistry. And I know that he moved into industry as well for some time. He has over 25 years experience in purification processes for proteins and peptide products. And within that particular sector, he worked with Archport and Biomanufacturing Limited, both contract manufacturing organisations. So with his experience as a technical manager, he thoroughly understands the ins and outs of a technical operation. So we're delighted to have John join us today. John will bring us through a journey covering the exciting developments and therapies being developed here in Ireland, including new vaccines, touch on the digital age, future changes to jobs within the sector, and how I suppose it is so important to develop your skills in this area now more than ever. What I would say is that you will be automatically muted, but we would ask everybody to pose any questions that they have in the chat box function so that we can take up those questions later on once John has finished his presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to John Milne and enjoy this webinar, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle, for your introduction. And I've just noticed, I hope I haven't spoken too soon, we did trial this, but I've just noticed my slide is not advancing on. So I'm going to have to figure that one out before we do anything. I can hear clearly, but I just can't for some reason. It seems to have stopped. My screen has frozen, so I don't know what's caused that. So bear with me for a second. Can you see those moving now?
It's moving.
Okay, fine, thank you. So good afternoon, everybody, and again, thanks to Michelle and her colleagues for the invitation to talk to you today. I hope everybody's keeping well. And I suppose Michelle gave me quite a broad brief, was essentially to touch on the current trends and maybe the landscape in manufacturing, and also maybe focusing to a certain extent, obviously, on the Irish landscape, which I will do later in the conversation. I won't go into any detail on NIBRT because thanks to Michelle, she's done a very nice job on that. I'm sure there are people on the line who have visited us or attended classes or training courses, and if you haven't, perhaps in the future you'll have the opportunity to come and visit us and maybe even attend for some sessions. But the key thing here was we were really set up, our facility effectively was opened in the middle of 2011, and it was really to provide an environment where people, from about an education perspective and from an industry perspective, could engage in competency-based learning. And I'll come back to that notion a little bit later in the conversation. And we were established by the IDA essentially to promote and to contribute to the efforts to develop what we now know to be a world-class, world-leading biopharmaceutical manufacturing industry in Ireland. And we do that, as Michelle outlined, across a whole variety of various programs. We've a clear mandate to support the education within our country, because that obviously generates the skilled graduates, which will then become the people who populate our facilities going forward. And again, I'll address that as we move forward in the conversation. If you want further information on NIBRT, there's a link there to our website, or if you want to have more specific conversations around programs that may or may not be of interest to you, we can again accommodate that conversation. And beyond today, if you want to reach out to me with particular questions, or I'd be happy to get back to you in time. So I suppose in terms of this afternoon, I thought I would start off by giving a very, very brief introduction to biopharmaceuticals, particularly to those folks on the line who this may be new to them. I'll talk a little bit about the landscape, the trends, where this industry is likely to go, what's really exciting people right now and into the future, from both an international and a national perspective, and then maybe finish off by talking a little bit about the skills agenda and what are the best ways to address current challenges, and how may you be, if you're particularly interested in upskilling, what might that look like for you. So for those of you that are new to the word biopharmaceuticals, or the conversation around biopharmaceuticals, essentially biopharmaceuticals are therapeutic products, and they're created through genetic manipulation of living cell systems in particular. And the term biopharmaceutical encompasses a lot of variety of products, but the clear differentiator between biopharmaceuticals and the small molecules that most people are familiar with is due to the route of manufacture. And again, as it encompasses a lot of different molecules and modalities to treat illness and disease, it would include things like vaccines, which are very common conversation now with respect to COVID-19, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But also peptides, hormones, gene therapies, cell therapies, essentially molecules that are not chemically synthesized in the traditional sense. So in a general sense, these molecules are much more complex, and the majority of biopharmaceuticals that we see in the market now and in development are essentially made using recombinant DNA, genetic engineering technologies that have been around for many years, but we're really entering into the biopharmaceutical era now, and I'll show you some data on that in a second. But I suppose I'm not going to go through all the text here, but just the take-home message really is that biologics in general terms are much more complex production processes. And I know there are probably people on the line who are working in small molecules or have experience and will equally say to me that, you know, our processes can be very complex, and there's no doubt they can. But the idea that you would get a cell to grow in a bioreactor, a cell that was never designed to grow in that bioreactor, probably never designed by nature to produce an antibody, and to grow large numbers of cells for periods of time to express a molecule potentially to treat cancer. You can imagine that there's a very high degree of complexity around that type of process. Our products tend to be, and our processes tend to be variable to a certain degree, and our process losses can be higher. And because the molecules are much more complex, they're much more difficult from a QC perspective to determine, you know, safety, quality, and efficacy. And to give you a quick schematic of that, this is one that's traditionally shown in lectures. You'll see the little image on the left, the small little molecule on the left. That's actually aspirin. And again, most people have probably taken aspirin unless maybe they're allergic to it. But aspirin is a relatively small molecule. It has 21 atoms, weighs 180 Daltons, and is a blockbuster product made by many companies around the world. It's now a generic medicine. If you look at the big molecule in the center, that's reflective of what we call a full-length monoclonal antibody. And a good example of that, for example, would be Keytruda, which is a product that's going to be made by MSD Biologics in Dublin, and is touted to be a blockbuster product for oncology applications. So straight away you can see that the molecule in the middle has 25,000 atoms, weighs 150,000 Daltons. Molecule on the left has 21 atoms and weighs 180 Daltons. So roughly speaking, about 1,000 times more complex. And you could never manufacture that molecule in the middle using traditional chemistry. You need something much more elaborate and complex. And again, as I said, biopharmaceuticals encompass a lot of different type of molecules. Our industry started primarily where people potentially had an illness and they could be treated for that illness by giving them perhaps a protein that their body didn't make. And that was really how the industry started, and that's still a very important part of our industry. If you consider, for example, diabetes, people who take insulin, they don't perhaps have the ability to make insulin, or the insulin doesn't work that they have, so they need to basically take a supplement of insulin, and that's a big industry. Then our industry began to develop and morph, and we began to manufacture more complex molecules like antibodies, and they really dominate the manufacturing landscape right now. I'm going to talk a bit about that later, and they will continue to dominate over the next, 10 to 20 years. There's no doubt, but we are beginning to see the emergence of a new type of strategy, a much more personalized approach to medicine, precision medicine, gene and cell therapies, and I'll give you some indication of what that might mean. Vaccines have been around for many, many years, and obviously vaccines are very much in the news now with respect to the hope that everybody has that a company or companies will get a vaccine for COVID-19 that we all badly need. And again, there are some emerging therapies like CAR-Ts and gene therapies, and I'll give you an indication of what that might mean later. In terms of the landscape itself, if we just have a little look, I think everybody appreciates, if no matter where you read surveys, the indication is that the biologics industry is booming. It has, over the last 20 years, has completely exploded with respect to revenues attributed to these molecules. So approximately a good working number would be about 25% of our total pharmaceutical spend is actually comprising molecules that are of biological origin. And it's envisaged by, what did they say there, by 2024 that over 50% of the top 100 pharmaceutical sales will be biological. And that puts a lot of pressure on facilities. If you look at the key market areas that are showing tremendous growth, it really is around oncology applications. As you might understand, due to the number of patients that are diagnosed with various cancers, it's a large number. It unfortunately kills a lot of people. So a lot of the larger companies are focused on the oncology space. And I just highlighted in the center of the screen there, the key growth drivers over the next few years. Keytruda, which, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be made by MSD in Dublin, and you'll also see there Opdivo, which is a similar type of antibody, treating oncology in pretty much the same way, actually. And that's going to be made by Bristol Myers Squibb in their Dublin facility. And these are two brand new, very extensive, very complex, pretty spectacular sites, actually, that have been set up with the purpose of making large amounts of these molecules, which are expected to be blockbuster status. So that clearly identifies to me that Ireland, is really playing at a very high level in this space and is able to attract these investment in these companies and obviously present a tremendous opportunity for people looking to transition. There are obviously other areas like anti-rheumatics, anti-diabetics, again with large patient bases that will continue to dominate in terms of revenue, in particular the market share and sales growth. The other problem that we've seen, and it is a problem to a certain extent, is that we've seen over the last few years tremendous demand for manufacturing space. It says here in this paper that we need 40 metric tons per annum now and growing, up from probably 13 metric tons of 5 years ago. So this is putting tremendous pressure on companies to understand how they can improve their production processes. It also puts a tremendous pressure on companies who have to look at alternative facilities and further investments. Now that again creates opportunity, but again this has to be managed within what is a very competitive and a very attritional business. So the demand has gone up. The other thing that we've seen over the years in our industry is that our industry is evolving very, very quickly. And I do use the term yesterday's biopharma. And this is not strictly correct because it is still very much in vogue now. I've just mentioned 2 facilities in Ireland who are setting up, which are very large scale facilities using very large scale capitally intensive stainless steel systems like you're looking at on the bottom left there. But what we are seeing is a tremendous progression towards more flexible manufacturing, more multiple product facilities, shorter, sharper campaigns. And what's really driven that evolution over the last few years is the fact that we're getting much better now at producing product in cells. Our cell titers have increased. We can keep cells growing at larger density for longer periods of time to produce larger amounts of protein. And that really has forced and encouraged our industry to adopt more flexible plastic-based single-use technologies, which has revolutionized a lot of what we do, and is obviously presenting opportunities for training and different skill sets, because again, this is a relatively new type of technology for a lot of sites. If we look at the Irish landscape, I mean, Ireland clearly is punching well above its weight in this space. I got this document courtesy of the IDA, which is from their Q1 documentation, and they're claiming 85 plus biopharmaceutical companies in Ireland with a geographical spread, large companies with large stainless steel, flexible facilities like Takeda Dunboyne, Wuxi Dundalk, and their platforms in production will essentially be using flexible plastic systems and only using steel where it makes sense. And then we have a variety of other companies that are supporting the industry. We obviously still have a very strong traditional pharmaceutical industry, medical device sector. So Ireland is really, really punching well above its weight, and it's great that we can attract, for a country of 5 million people, that we can attract this investment. And again, this is some information. I've put a reference there for people if they want to read further, but just a couple of screen grabs from the Biopharmachem Ireland information, which Biopharmachem Ireland will be the representative body for the industry, and they put out some very nice metrics and graphics around what attracts companies to the industry. And I've actually put a circle around the word talent on the image on the right, because it's really talent. A lot of people will refer to reasons why companies choose to set up in Ireland, and we have a very attractive business and climate that's very important for companies. But without the talent piece and the funneling of talent from our university programs, people who want to transition in from other industries into the biopharm industry, without that talent pool, we would not, it is clear, we wouldn't have succeeded in attracting these companies. And what I see is just the general themes going forward with respect to manufacturing is we're going to see a lot of our sites in Ireland diversifying into multiple product capability. So rather than building a facility that is essential perhaps for one product, companies will be looking at having a strategy where they can bring in multiple products on a campaign basis, wherever it might be, and that improves obviously the cadence through the plant. And that's something that these facilities are very, very expensive, particularly if they're large, and the justification to build a facility to produce maybe one product is probably no longer desirable unless you have a particular need to make maybe a blockbuster product. All the other sites in Ireland, what I'm seeing is we're seeing them utilizing the infrastructure to make multiple products, which creates great opportunity, new processes, new innovations, and new skill sets. Just a quick speed around some of the other things. We're going to see, obviously I've talked about single-use and flexible manufacturing. Michelle mentioned the trend towards digitization, the so-called manufacturing 4.0, and there's no doubt that this is coming at a very fast pace. So not only is potentially the type of products we're going to make change, the operations we may use will change to a certain extent, but the actual environment in which people will work will be different. Obviously our industry is still very heavily regulated, that's not going to change, but we are going to be much more reliant and using data in a way that we haven't done before, and that obviously creates challenges and opportunities for new skill sets for people with those skill sets that will have to become, you know, much more flexible and much more amenable to these new types of activity. I don't have time to go into some of the other strategies about intensification and continuous manufacturing, but these are things that are going to change the landscape of manufacturing over the next 5 to 10 years. And if somebody, for example, was transitioning now into the industry, within the next 5 to 10 years, they're going to be doing things in a very different way, actually, with respect to how they're going to do things. The one area that I have actually highlighted in green there is just, you know, to talk positively about where the industry is likely to go with respect to, you know, personalized treatments. And I've identified there cell therapies and gene therapies, and there's no doubt that this is coming at a very, very fast pace. So the traditional vision in medicine is we sort of look at a bunch of people as a population of similar individuals, and we try and come up with strategies to treat patients in very similar ways. And now what we're beginning to see with the power of the genome, and as we're learning more about genomics and DNA, we're beginning now to look at much more swapping over to really the individual and seeing a population of patients as a group of different individuals who will have unique responses to treatments, for example, and maybe we can design strategies to treat those people and come up with therapeutics that are uniquely associated with that individual's genetic makeup, for want of a better term. So this is really what's happening in personalization of medicine, and this is becoming very, very interesting. We loosely use the term ATMP. You'll hear people talking about advanced therapy medicinal products, and it's generally an umbrella term for what we call new ways of looking at treatment of disease. And primarily today I'll talk a little bit about cell therapy and I'll talk a little bit about gene therapy. And again, I don't know whether people are familiar with these types of treatments, but just a quick Google search and read about these. These are unbelievably powerful treatments. And I'm just going to show one in particular. So this is a molecule called Kymriah, which was the first CAR-T treatment licensed to Novartis in the last couple of years. And it's really a transformative treatment. Now, what you're looking at, the image here, by the way, is you're looking at a pouch of cells. So it's not a traditional injection as you might think. This is a population of cells that in this case is drawn from the patient. So blood sample is taken. And from that blood sample, we isolate T cells, which are natural killer cells. We put those cells in culture. We treat them genetically. And on the surface of these cells, they will express a particular marker, or what we call a CAR receptor. When those cells are then infused back into the patient, these cells are now primed, ready to interact with the patient's own specific tumor. So you can see the power of this treatment, and the results of this type of treatment in the clinic has been tremendous. And already now we're moving on to improved CAR T cells, we're moving on to CAR NK cells. There's a whole variety of cells in the immune system that are now being considered and being developed with respect to that personalization of treatment for oncology. And these are particularly very, very powerful treatments for people who are patients who essentially are not showing any signs of improvement with existing therapies. So again, extremely amazing treatments in a lot of ways. If you spin the conversation out and we talk a little bit about gene therapies, I think most people who are familiar with biology, even at school level, will realize, you know, everybody talks about everything coming from our genes. Genes essentially make proteins. Some people are born with deficiencies in genes. They're missing a gene. They have a corruption in the gene message, which means they don't produce a functional protein, and that is obviously going to lead to a significant problem depending on the nature of the gene that's infected. So with gene therapy, we're now looking at ways that we can replace faulty genes, we can inactivate or switch off faulty genes, or we can perhaps even introduce to a patient a healthy copy of a gene to enable that patient to make a product that they ordinarily would never be able to do. And I'll just give you one example that's recently approved. This is a molecule called Xeljanz. I put it in here because just artifactually, it is the most expensive biopharmaceutical on the market at about $2.1 million. It's produced using viral vectors, and it replaces a protein called SMN protein, or survival motor neuron protein, that particular children don't have. So this is a treatment for children who develop spinal muscular atrophy, which is a devastating disease. And you might have seen during lockdown, the early stages of lockdown, everybody was fundraising for Dan, the Do It For Dan campaign, and this little fella suffers from spinal muscular atrophy, and the funds that they raised, the family raised, and everybody raised, I guess, was to send them for this treatment, which is a transformative medication. So one injection to produce a protein that the child doesn't ordinarily make. This is amazing that we can do this type of work, and there's lots of gene therapies in development. There will be gene therapies, I have no doubt, will be made in Ireland. We don't have that industry yet in terms of manufacturing, but it is coming. So again, we'll need new skill sets, we'll need new operations, and it's a tremendous opportunity. So what Ireland is really trying to do is to try to position itself to receive that next wave of investment. Just while we're talking about, new medications, I think everybody's very much driven by the news. We've all become armchair experts on coronavirus. It's probably the one virus that everybody seems to know something about. And there's probably more companies now working on a treatment for this than ever before with respect to a vaccine. Again, I don't have time to go into the detail of some of this, but just to suffice to say that there are a huge amount of efforts taking place. Vaccines typically can take 10 to 15 years to develop. We're trying to get a vaccine in a year. But the future is bright. The message is out there. There's tremendous trials started, and we just hope and pray that we can get a vaccine that'll get us out of the particular problem we're in at the moment. There's the bad boy on the left. This is the guy that causes all the trouble. Just one little anecdote I had. If you were to pick up a pen now and draw a full stop on a page with a pen, you'll fit 500 million particles inside that full stop. That's what we're up against. And this is why we're adhering to the restrictions that we have. What I'm drawing your attention to in the first instance is the little red appendages sticking out from the surface of the virus. This is what's called spike protein. And there are 2 trials ongoing at the moment. One of them is with Pfizer, where they're taking the sequence for that spike protein, they're putting it into a vesicle. They're in trials very shortly, if not already, to get this into patients. And then the particle then will infect people's cells. The cells will then express the surface of the spike protein or the element of that spike protein, and you raise an immune response. And by putting this into, you're hoping that the immune response is sufficient to protect you from the true virus. That's essentially the basis of vaccines. And any cursory glance on Google now, any of the media sites, if you just put in COVID-19 vaccine and you're interested, you can read around what's happening. This is amazing technology, but it's having to happen very quickly. So it's a good example of how the industry can really work together, and they are working together for the betterment of everybody to try and get a vaccine. What I'm going to do now, in the interest of time, is just swap over to the skills piece. And what I wanted to talk a little bit about was just the skills. And I'm going to refer you to just a document that we put out every year. Our marketing team publish a document with a group called the Medicine Maker in the UK. And what we essentially do is we look at the various trends across a whole variety of criteria. It's available on our website for anybody to freely read. But we asked the industry a series of questions. I think last year we had just shy of 100 people responded, and this would be across the world, small, medium and large manufacturers. And when we asked the people what do they see as the biggest challenges to the growth of the industry, it's interesting that staff and technical competencies and skills are always called out. When we do a little probing question a little bit further and we say, well, what type of skills do we see? We see a whole variety of skills. There seems to be particular pinch points in the engineering, automation, manufacturing, science and technology group, but all the way right through from production in drug substance to drug product to QC to microbiology to engineering. There's a variety of challenges and a unique set of skills that are needed for this industry. And of course, some people actually will transition into the industry. They'll have a full-time position. Other people will quite happily transition in as contractors, and they'll work on projects for short periods of time. And you know, a lot of the companies will take on a lot of contractors, particularly when they're in that setup commissioning qualification phase. A lot of that work lends itself. So we see an awful lot of people moving in and around companies in that contractor space. When we ask another question, which again, this is for people, you know, on the line who might be looking to transition in, what are the type of skill sets that industry are particularly looking at? Obviously, going into a life science discipline, they're looking at, you know, technical skills, competencies at some level. Obviously, you can develop those skills, you can be trained, but primarily you're in a technical environment, so they're looking at those type of skills. Interestingly, we've seen every year, this is the 4th year we've done this survey, and each year we see incrementally increasing is business skills, acumen around communication, teamwork is being called out as a very important attribute. Companies will assess emotional intelligence competencies. You know, how are you going to fit within this team structure? How are you going to fit within this company? That's very important. And obviously the old chestnut that people are often faced with, particularly if it's their first position out of university as well, do you have prior experience in a GMP environment? And that's something that obviously, if you've never worked in a GMP environment, you're clearly not going to have. But my idea around that, and people can talk to me after this, or you know, I can follow up with you individually, is that, you know, don't let that, certainly do not let that put you off. A GMP is a foundation, it's a philosophy, you learn it, no one knows it all, and you pick it up and you develop your skills. That should not be a barrier for you to get into a position and prove yourself. But I have a little bee in my bonnet about that one, because when I moved into the industry, as Michelle said, she made me feel old, but I mean, many years ago when I moved in, I had no GMP skills either. You know, I didn't know what GMP was. You learn it, you understand what it is, you understand what it means to work in regulations, and I think that's an important point I'd like to make. And of course, the obvious thing is, well, where do you get the skills? Now, industry favors, you know, on-the-job training, send people to NIBRT or a NIBRT-like facility where they can engage in a lab environment, in a practical environment. That's all very good. That's always going to come out highly. But there are other opportunities for people. We see an awful lot more people coming through our facility that are either funding themselves or companies are funding them to get additional qualifications, to get additional nuance to what they want to do. And a lot of these courses, of course, are, well, they're all fully accredited, but they can be delivered on a part-time basis, so they can marry itself to whatever your circumstances might be. People are registering with us on short courses. As Michelle mentioned, online training, there's lots of online training. We have a version of it ourselves where people can pick up skills. So there's a lot of different solutions. Now, if you're in a company environment, perhaps the company will obviously have a particular strategy themselves as they'll help to train, but typically they don't have the time or the resource perhaps, or the access to equipment to train you when that equipment is being used in production. So it's more than likely on that basis that they will probably get you to move out to somebody who can do that training. But I think the word competency, I'd like to call that out because that's important, and particularly for people who are looking to transition into the industry. You'll hear me talking about training and skills. You'll hear me talking about attitude. Attitude is possibly the most important attribute you'll ever have to work in our industry. And from a trainer perspective, attitude is a difficult thing to train. Some people have it, some people don't. GMP production doesn't suit everybody, but it suits some people. So getting engaged in active learning, thinking about what you're doing, strategizing about your career, seeing how you can develop. This again is important for people who might be looking to transition from one industry into the next. They already have a degree of competency, but they're trying to assess and decide, well, what does it mean to, what will my skill set mean in the biopharma industry? Is there an opportunity for me to transition? What I'd say is absolutely there is. People have made very successful careers and have transitioned successfully into our industry from other industries. And of course, all this concept of competency and learn by doing is not new. It's been around for many, many years. What you have to learn to do, you learn by doing. It's the hands-on, it's the competency, it's the thinking, it's the attitude is very important. So biopharma is going to continue to play an ever-increasing role in therapeutic strategies. The challenge for companies is to make sure that the personnel they have are up for the job. They are the best workforce, bar none. They're suitably qualified, they're trained, they can work in regulations. Remember, this is the most heavily regulated industries because of the nature of the products we produce. And the companies who look to do this and go beyond just ticking boxes and really engage with their staff will engage the best staff. Your staff will be motivated, you'll retain your staff. And of course, that's a win for employers, it's a win for employees, and most importantly, it's a win for our patients. The last couple of slides, this is just from me. I just thought a little bit about when I transitioned in, and maybe a piece of advice for some people who are in that position on the line, who are looking to transition in, maybe graduating and seeing what the future might hold. What I'd advise you to do is, take ownership of your career management, form credible career plans. You can't bite off more than you can chew. You have to walk before you can run. There's a plethora of opportunities to initiate and sustain networks on social media, on LinkedIn, get involved in these groups, learn what's happening in the industry, talk to people. And like any role that you'll ever apply for, your skills, your attributes, your experience, your qualifications, you've got to get that on paper. You've got to go through, unfortunately, that whole saga. This is how Collins McNicholas will help you to get that CV right. It's all about preparation and understand the broadest possible range of your employment opportunities. I would advise everyone, keep a learner's mindset. It's crucial to be successful in biopharma, to get the position, to develop. Nobody will probably stay in production for their life if they get a production job. They'll want to move into other teams and move up the value chain. It's all about seeking new information, reflecting on what you've done. Keep that mindset. That's going to help you. And I go back to the skills, the training, and the attitude. Ask yourself, do you have the attitude to work in this industry? If you get the opportunity, you'll know very quickly what do you do. But there are huge opportunities nationally, internationally, for people to transition into this industry. This is a truly global industry. Ireland is doing very well. We're going to see continued growth. We're going to see new product modalities, new expansions, and we should all tell that biopharma story. These medicines are life-changing. They're transformative medicines, and it's a very, very rewarding way to earn a living, no matter where you play in this space. Whether you're in a company, whether you're supplying into a company, you're part of a nice story. And the key skills of solving problems, team building, being good at presentation and good at communication, that's what we need. So in the interest of time, I'm going to stop there. Thank you for dialing in. Stay safe, everybody. And I'm going to pass back to Michelle, if that's okay.
Great, absolutely. And John, look, it's a great journey brought us through there, the wonderful insights and amazing treatments being developed. I'm always blown away by what's happening out there in that space, and it happens so quickly. And I love the whole idea of you particularly talking about attitude. Now I have young teenagers here at home that have a different type of attitude, but anyways, hopefully that'll stand to them in the future. But having that learner's mindset is absolutely fantastic. And I think if anyone's transitioning in to that space, or perhaps in that sector already in a career, to be thinking about what's there for the future for their career. Just on some questions there, Hugh was asked, do you see any opportunities for the graduates with a mix of life science and data science qualifications in biopharma, and particularly in the manufacturing space? And you did allude to data utilization there, John, during the course of that presentation.
Yeah, that's a perfect question, and it actually is right on the money. I would see tremendous opportunity. People who are, let me use the term colloquially, data savvy, people are familiar with utilizing system statistics, these type of initiatives, and there's a clear transition. We're going to see a lot more data. We're going to be utilizing data, and it's not just about big data. It's about the right data. It's about what data do you use, how do you interrogate that data to make better processes, more refined processes, better developed processes. This is why industry is doing this. So we're going to see a tremendous, and I would actually say that in time you'll probably see more academic institutes offering courses in this space to address that particular need, because it won't just be for biopharma, it'll be for a whole lot of manufacturing industries. But particularly for us, yes, most definitely opportunities.
Yeah, great. And just another question there, John. Do you feel that there is a lack of degree programs or postgraduate opportunities available in Ireland to help progress and develop the ATMP industry in Ireland?
Very good question. I would agree with the sentiment. You know, the industry, if you look at our courses, most of our courses, and I teach into several of them, you know, we've been traditionally very focused on recombinant proteins, monoclonal antibodies, just the very standard way of doing things. So the curricula do have to change. And what I can say is, based on conversations I'm having with some institutes, is that that's already in place, and it's only a matter of time. Within the next year, there will be courses, particularly at postgraduate level, that will be dedicated more towards just ATMPs in particular. But I see the transition happening at undergraduate as well, where content will become a little bit more diverse. People will be looking at that, and that's part of a wider initiative. In fact, NIBRT was part of an initiative in the last couple of years where we were looking at CGT, cell and gene therapy. We created a forum of interested stakeholders, and one of the key aspects of that was to drive the education agenda. So watch this space. It's definitely on everybody's radar. It will change, and as opportunities present themselves in Ireland and sites begin to look at Ireland and create opportunities in Ireland, it's a natural that the academic institutes will follow. So some done, a lot more to do, but it's coming. Yeah.
Great. I see somebody else is trying to get a question in there, but we can always cover it later on, or certainly when we send out the slides. Somebody's trying to type a question through there, but we can give it a moment. I suppose really just want to say a very, very heartfelt thank you to John for joining us today, and also the team in NIBRT. Alison Quinn, the marketing communications manager. It's been an absolute pleasure to deal with over the past few weeks when we came to you with this idea. You mentioned your own biopharma trends report, which I did read myself, and again, we will send on the slides today with the copy of that, but we also are launching the Collins McNicholas Biopharma Report, literally hot off the press, and it is a labour market review. So that is actually going live today. So we will send out a link to that particular report also. So again, plenty of bedtime reading along with John's slides from today for everybody. Just one last question while I have you there, John. Ian said, I was surprised to see tissue engineered products in your presentation. Is there any of these products close to production?
Again, just very quickly from an Irish perspective, probably not at the moment. Tissue engineering is has been brought under the umbrella of ATMPs. It's part of the same sort of regulations when you look at the regulatory aspect. There's a lot of activity in the space. It's not the area that I'm most closely associated with, so I won't give information that I might not be able to stand over. But it's a good question. But I do know that you know, there is a lot of movement in that space, and a lot of you know, particularly with newer technologies and advanced manufacturing and 3D printing and all these type of things that are coming. It's definitely, there are companies who play in that space. It's not something we see a lot of in NIBRT, primarily because it doesn't have at the moment doesn't have a large footprint in the Irish marketplace.
Okay. Okay, John, thank you. So just to wrap up, or just close to the 2 p.m, we said we would have people back. I'm sure there's people back to their workstations again. I said just a very, very particular thank you to everybody in NIBRT for all your help in getting this webinar off the ground today. To the team behind the scenes, Niamh, Holly and Ryan, I do appreciate all their help with this. As I said, you know, if you have any particular questions you want to redirect, we have contact details. We will send those along when we send the slides later today. So if you wish to circle back with John on any of his points or particular training requirements you may have, please do so. And also, as any time with the Collins McNicholas team across our 6 locations, and that would be for permanent, temporary, or certainly contracting as well, which you mentioned, John, and I know I alluded to at the start, is a growing area, and we can help contractors get off the ground and make sure that they're compliant and set up and take all that headache away from them. So we'll be obviously issuing more information about that on social media over the coming weeks.
Yeah. And just finally from me, Michelle, just if there are people out there on the line who would like the opportunity to come in and talk to us or have a trip around our facility, we will look to do that again. We're open to that. It's an open door here. We can get you around. We just have to be cautious with because we're only recently back after the restrictions were lifted. But once we have a little bit more latitude on that, we can facilitate a tour or a visit. If anybody is interested, just reach out to me and I can accommodate that for you.
Well worth a visit. As I said, we've partaken in that for many years. I've been there myself, and it is truly a wonderful facility. So everybody, until we link in again, stay safe, and hopefully, as John talked about, all these the vaccine trials been completed, particularly with in light of our current situation with COVID. We do hope that those vaccine trials work successfully in the very near future, and that this global pandemic becomes a thing of the past, and we rise above it and move on within the different sectors we find ourselves working in. We will be having a further webinar in the coming weeks with Engineers Ireland, and that will focus more on the medtech space. So we will be sending out information around future events. So thank you again, John and Alison back in NIBRT. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. We will send on the recording and the slides, and have a great rest of your day. And as I said, stay safe during this current environment. Thank you.